Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. How many of you have that one go-to book that you use as a reference guide for a specific topic? I'm sure we can all think of a few. The reason I bring this up is because on today's segment, we'll sit down and talk to Dr. Shabir Ally about his go-to book titled Jesus in the Quran by Geoffery Parriender. Though this book's reprint edition is from 2013, let's get Dr. Shabir Ally's thoughts on why this book continues to be a valuable source of knowledge for him. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're doing our book review, and I know when we had discussed the book review, you said this book is your go-to book. So what is the book about?
Yeah, so the book is entitled Jesus in the Quran by Geoffery Parriender. It was published first in 1965, apparently, just
Wow.
When I was still a toddler. And I'm using the 1996 reprint, and if I think back over my career, at about that time, I started giving lectures in a very prominent manner. And a very common topic of lectures is Jesus in the Quran. And so this has become my go-to book. And I find myself still referring back to this after all of these years.
So you've had it since since 1996, and we're talking regularly. You've gone back to it.
Yes, in fact, I don't know when I bought it, but I could have bought it soon after it was released. At least the reprint was released, and I know that I've been using it over decades, and I've continued to refer to it. It's a stock full of information from the Quran and commentary on Quranic verses dealing with everything Jesus.
I think it's interesting that we're reviewing such an old book, but the fact that you're still using it to this day, I think will be of great value to our viewers. So tell me a little bit about the book and how it explores the idea of Jesus in the Quran itself.
Yeah, so the book is written by Geoffery Parriender, who happens to be a Christian, that I know from some of his other writings, and here too it's evident. What is unique about this is, several things. One is the arrangement. The way in which topically, chapter after chapter, we are given a host of information from the Quran. So what did Jesus say? What did Jesus do? How did Jesus die or not die, given the Quranic viewpoint? What about Jesus and the future? Did he predict the coming of another prophet after him? So here the author goes into depth in culling the verses from the Quran and packaging them neatly into these very different chapters. And then what about the various titles of Jesus that are given in the Quran? He's called Messiah. He's called Messenger of God. He is shown to have performed all of these miraculous deeds. He's called the Spirit of God. He's called the Word of God. So a lot of this information actually comes from Arabic sources. And when I first started out and had very little recourse to Arabic writings, and still Arabic to me is a second language, English is my first language, so I find it easier to accommodate the information from a book like this than for me to go perusing Arabic sources. So for young persons out there, Muslims in particular, who want to know, like, how do we do what Shabir Ally is doing? Well, this is one of the books that shaped me, and I think it is very important that I make this public.
And how does he, obviously the title is Jesus in the Quran, so given that he's a Christian author, does he try and juxtapose, or does he juxtapose sort of Christian perspectives, or is it solely focused on how Jesus is presented in the Quran?
He does juxtapose Christian approaches, to borrow your word here. And that is very important. It's been important for me in the field in which I operate, because I'm constantly speaking to non-Muslims. And in speaking to non-Muslims, it's very important to understand the viewpoint of non-Muslims. If we see everything from within the lens of the Muslim community, and we speak to non-Muslims the way we speak to fellow Muslims, they may not understand much of what we're talking about. To begin with, we'll use Arabic terms because our Muslim audiences understand the Arabic terms. But if we're going to speak to a non-Muslim audience, we have to very quickly be able to translate the Arabic terms into terms that are familiar to our non-Muslim listeners. And it's not only the terms, but the manner in speaking, the way of describing and discussing the issues at hand. All of this is kind of a cultural translation that needs to take place. And reading a book like this, studying it, absorbing it, gives us that edge in being able to communicate the message to a non-Muslim audience in a manner that will be easily accommodated by them.
What would you say to someone who might say, well, you're reading the book from someone from a Christian perspective? How can we say confidently that perspective is accurate or reflective of what the Quran actually says about Jesus?
We cannot, and this is why we have to do a lot of homework. We have to read a wide variety of sources. We have to read Muslim authors, Christian authors, atheist authors, a wide variety. And by reading this wide variety, we get a good sense of what seems to be a consensus, what everybody would agree with, regardless of their religious background or whether they have no religious background at all. Then we can see how each different perspective is shaped by a certain religious background, and we as individuals then have to choose our path and see, where do we think the truth really lies? Does it lie in this stream of thought, or that stream of thought, or the other stream of thought? So we know what is basic and what is agreeable to everyone, and then we know where our particular slant and direction is, and we can differentiate between the two. So when we insist on a point, it should be a point that is widely acceptable across the board. And then if somebody does not seem to know this point, either they need to be educated, or if they themselves are following a different slant, we can be able to point that out. Say, I'm sorry, here are the basic facts of the matter, and if you're not accepting this, it may be because of a certain slant.
So based on the idea of, understanding your own slants, do you think the author in any way sways the reader to one perspective or another, or is it kind of a, this is how Jesus is portrayed in the Quran, these are the different perspectives, it's for your taking kind of thing?
I would like to say that mostly the author does the latter. He leaves the readers to form their own conclusions. But authors are human beings, and naturally he has his own tendencies and inclinations and conclusions, and those conclusions that he already has would largely shape the presentation of the material that he puts together in the way that he does. To be fair, I have not seen a more comprehensive book than this dealing with the Quranic statements about Jesus, and it seems that he's done a thorough job of bringing together all of the Quranic verses that deal with Jesus, and he has categorized them in the various sections of this book as he has done. So that seems to be a very fair and thorough representation of the Quran. His Christian commentary on how these verses might appear to a Christian is very valuable, and naturally it is that particular slant in his conclusions, and the way he presents that would naturally be with the hope that he might be persuasive to his readers. But at the same time, he does a fair job of putting a lid on his tendencies and his own Christian conclusions in order to bring out the statements of the Quran, and also the commentaries that have been given to the various Quranic verses by a wide spectrum of Muslim scholarship, traditional Muslim scholarship, modern Muslim scholarship, and so on. So he will cite many different scholars dealing with the question, both Muslim and Christian, and academic scholars who do not necessarily bring their religion into the discussion.
Are there any points, maybe, because we've talked broadly about the book, but to give some content, to give viewers a taste of what's actually in the book itself, are there any ideas or points that sort of have struck you over the years in the book?
I don't know if there's any one specific point, but or a few specific points, but I think just the thoroughness with which he has dealt with some of the issues are very important. Like, for example, when it comes to the death of Jesus, which has become a controversial issue between Muslims and Christians, he looks at the Quranic verse, which for a long time some Christians have said must be mistaken, because they said that history establishes that Jesus died on a Roman cross, and now the Quran is saying they killed him not nor crucified him. So what could that refer to? And they have said, okay, the Quran must be obviously mistaken. And his simple reply is that, well, the Quran is just simply denying that the Jews killed Jesus. And he's saying, well, historically that is correct, because the Jews didn't kill Jesus. It was the Romans who killed Jesus. Of course, the discussion doesn't end with that
Obviously,
simple
yeah.
observation. He goes into other possibilities, and he cites, again, both Muslims and Christians who have given a variety of meanings to that Quranic passage, all with the obvious intent of showing that the Quran is actually not wrong. In a way, too, he is seeking dialogue with Muslims through this book, and he is showing, he's more interested in showing similarities and concurrence between Muslims and Christians rather than to show discrepancy and dichotomy.
I know you've, from a context perspective, I know you've given it, I think I have a sense of your rating, but we'll leave that to the end. From a stylistic perspective, how do you think the book presents itself? Are there any challenges you think for other readers maybe?
I think rather than challenges from the style of the book, the manner of its segmentation and presentation into chapters and subdivisions makes the book a very quick and easy reference source for everything about Jesus. If you wanted to know, what were the words of Jesus? What did Jesus say? What is this particular title of the Jesus in the Quran mean? We can find it quickly and easily within his book.
And who would you suggest this as a good read to? I know you mentioned students or people who are interested in getting into your area of expertise, but any other people who you think might benefit from the book?
Yes, I didn't mention the fact that Christians who want to know what the Quran says about Jesus will find this not only an easy reference, as I mentioned previously, but they will also see how an educated Christian responds to the information about Jesus that is there in the Quran.
And just as we wrap up, if you have to rate it, how would you rate it?
Well, I seldom give 10 to a book because
yes,
nothing is
I don't
perfect,
think
but
you've
the
ever
book
given
is,
a 10.
But seeing what it is and what recognizing that it's written by a Christian author and the fact that I wouldn't agree with everything he says, I wouldn't hesitate to give this book a 10.
And just one last point as we wrap up. I think it's interesting that this is, I think in my time that I've done book reviews with you, this is the very first time that I think you've picked a book that has been that was written so long ago, because I think when we were talking earlier, you said it was 1965. So is there anything that you can share about, nowadays there is an emphasis on, okay, what's the newest book? Let's learn this, let's learn that. What is the value in going back to books that have been written, well before our time?
Well, for one thing, I'm getting emails from Muslim youth around the world asking, what do we need to do in order to be able to preach Islam as Shabir Ally does? So in a way, heading towards retirement, I'm sharing my life story here. These are some of the books this is one of the books that have shaped my thinking and my approach. So I want to share that with the Muslim youth. But you're right. So more generally, some old books are still worth reading. And if they haven't been reviewed yet from a Muslim perspective, or at least from my perspective, I think we can add value to the common knowledge by and the knowledge of the general populace by giving a view and doing a review of such books.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir. If you want more of Let the Quran Speak, you can watch previous episodes or new ones by subscribing to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/QuranSpeaks. Stay updated by liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter @Quran_speaks. And when you're on the go, listen to our podcast at QuranSpeaks.com.